Hello, Plume fans. I thought since we are between episodes this week, it would be fun to do something a little bit different and take you behind the scenes of what it takes to create an episode of Plume. This first episode is going to be talking about what it takes to make the visual aspect of the Plume series. I apologize if there's any kind of background tone. I'm recording this in front of my desktop, so it gets kind of hot when I have a lot of things running. So you might hear the computer act up a little bit in the background. So I apologize for that. So we begin in Photoshop, and I select one of the pages from the actual webcomic that I have saved on my computer. And then using the selection tool, I will select a portion of the page or one of the panels and then crop it down so that's all that I have. This page is super easy because it has no dialogue in it. It's just visual. So I'm literally just cutting out the portions of the page and saving them. So then I save each section or panel onto the desktop, usually numbered Plume 1, 2, 3, however many I end up needing. Sometimes the pages are divided into weird shapes that I cannot select. When I'm in this tool, it only does squared shapes. So that's why I'm combining two different sections of the page into one panel for the episode, because I can't cut around those weird shapes. Going on to the next page, we have our boys, Corrick and Dom. So continuing to cut out different panels and cropping them down. A lot of the time, a panel will have dialogue in it, but it ends up just being easier for me to edit it down, to just cut around the images and not include the dialogue in the crops. So that's why with this panel, it's originally drawn to have both of them in the same panel, but I am cutting them out so they each have kind of a close-up panel, just because it's easier, it's faster, I don't have to edit out the speech bubble, and you still get the gist of the image and the characters without having to go through the extra time and work it takes if I were to include those speech bubbles in this panel crop. So once that is done, now we move on to a panel that does have a speech bubble that is not easy for me to cut around. So I will crop down the panel and then I will blow it up just a little bit so I can see it a little easier. And then I use what I believe is called the clone tool, I believe. So basically you click a part of the screen and that is the part of the screen that is copied. Basically, I'm just taking the same color as Dom's shirt and having it cloned on top of where the speech bubble is. So I'm essentially coloring in the speech bubble. Depending on the background and what's going on in the scene, sometimes it gets a little more difficult to do this to the speech bubbles, but luckily with this page it's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. The only thing that I really have to match up are the couple of lines on his shirt, which I will do using the same tool, just clicking on the line and then working to make sure it matches together once the speech bubble is out of the way. This episode, the speech bubbles are pretty straightforward. It's a little difficult when it's this gradient type of background that you see in this panel. That happens a lot within Plume. Kaylin puts a lot of those type of backgrounds to her scenes. It's not too terribly difficult to edit. It's just a matter of having to clone the same section so you still get the same gradient of colors when you clone the speech bubbles out and you don't end up with a weird blob of gray when the rest of that background section is blue and that kind of thing. But some of the other backgrounds, depending on the scene and the portion of the story, do take a little more time when it comes to blocking out the speech bubbles. The one that always takes the most time, at least for Plume, is whenever the background is colored dots. It's a very stylized comic booky background that I know Kaylin uses. She used it a lot more in the early sections of the story, and she hasn't used it as much as we've gotten further along. But that background is the one that always takes the most time, because that is the background where it is the most obvious that speech bubbles have been taken out. But I try very hard to make sure it looks as good as it can and looks as uniform as I can get it to look. And as you can see here, I attempted to extend the lines that are drawn onto Dom's clothes. There's a line on his shoulder and then a line coming up that kind of shows where his shoulder sits. and it was partially covered by the speech bubble. So I tried to extend those lines and tried to make them look good, but I'm not an artist, and extending them all the way just made it look really weird, and it didn't look right at all. So I went back and erased some of that and decided not to go that route because it just didn't look right to me. I always like to at least try to be able to use the entire panel when I do this kind of editing, because the artwork is so amazing and Kaylin is such a great artist and author, and I really just want to show off as much of her work as I can. So I will always try and do the full panel of something, even if it's something like this that has a lot of difficult elements that are in the background. But once I got over to where the little tail of the speech bubble cuts into Corrick's hair, Corrick has these like stray hairs that come off the front of his head, and the speech bubble went right through the end of those hairs. So I was trying to erase that part of the speech bubble and still make that little line of hair look like it had been drawn there on purpose. And it did not work the way that I wanted it to work. I don't know, his hair just looked weird, and I couldn't get his hair to match up correctly, and I ended up messing it up. It didn't really look clean. It looked like I'd cut something out and then tried to crappily replace it. I just decided to cut the image down and crop out that back line of trees and the top part of Corrick's head. And I've done that in the past. There have been other panels and other backgrounds or other parts of characters' hair or clothing that I wasn't able to get reshaped to looking the right way. So I will just crop the image down, so you still have the majority of the image. Just my crappy job of trying to make it look nice where I'd cut things out is gone, and you don't have to see it. And now that is done, that is the final image of the page. So then the only thing left to do is to make the credit cards that I put at the end of every episode. We have a fantastic group of actors who have all lent their beautiful voices to this project. So I always make sure to include credits at the end of every episode, just to show our appreciation and to give them some recognition for all of the work that they put into this show and for bringing these characters to life. The credits for this episode are very quick to make because there are only 2 of them. Since this episode is just Corrick and Dom, the only credits that I make are for Eric Snyder, who is the voice of Corrick, and Daniel Merriman, who voices Dominic. And that is it. That is how I put together all of the visual elements that go into an episode of Plume. I hope you liked this video. I do plan on making more videos like this. If you liked this video, please subscribe, leave a comment, watch old episodes, and be sure to check back next week for the next episode of Plume. And if you want to see more things like Plume, then check out Girls Next Door, which is the other show that Pursued by Bear Productions makes and is a very similar setup to Plume. It is another webcomic that has had audio put on top of it, but it is a very different storyline. It's very silly, it's very fun, and a lot of the same voices that you hear on Plume can also be found on Girls Next Door. So feel free to check it out. I am Lindsay Zanna, editor, producer, director, and the voice of Vesper Grey for the Plume web series. Thank you, and I will see you later.